So this is a religious question. I'm just curious your perspective on this. So what are your thoughts on the concept of forgiveness? Now, Christians obviously strive for that. They say, and sometimes I think they probably legitimately try to say they're going to forgive. Do you maintain that? And I'm not asking you where you were before, but as an atheist, is the forgiveness and the way that Christians like to portray that, is that something we should strive for, or does it not matter since we're not trying to get into heaven?
Yeah, I think it's something that you should strive for, but we need to use our critical thinking faculties to figure out what's worth forgiving and what's worth not forgiving. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the harder thing to do because a lot of that is going to depend on what the harm was. A lot of that is going to depend on individually how you interpreted that act. For some people that may be a very horrible thing that happened to you. For other people they may be like, okay, well, I can let that one fly, I can let that one go, and so long as it doesn't happen again, then we'll be okay. So I'm okay with it, and actually I don't see how we can not get advance our relationships with the people that we love forward without eventually having to forgive something that either they did or asking for forgiveness when we do something stupid. Right. And
Right.
so I just think it has to be a central part of what we do, but it does in and of itself. It's not like an end in and of itself. It has to be attached to really thinking critically about what's worth forgiving, what's not worth forgiving. I mean, if somebody's totally horrible to you, or totally horrible to your children, I don't think it's worth forgiving. If it's something that's going to traumatize them, leave them with all kinds of, trauma about, the relationship or emotionally or maybe even physically, right? I mean, those are
Yeah.
definitely things that, yeah, maybe that's not somebody that might be worth, keeping in your life in that way. And so might
Mm-hmm.
not be worth pursuing forgiveness with that person.
Yeah. Because we all saw after Charlie Kirk was killed, his wife came out and she would forgive the killer.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you believe that or not, whatever. But that was the point. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what you're saying is no,
Yeah,
probably not.
yeah, probably not. Maybe not for that. Yeah, you know, and maybe even not that person. Maybe you should like try to see what happens with the trial and everything like that. The case is actually very, very crazy, and we could probably do a whole podcast just on everything going on with that whole mess and
Yeah.
craziness. Yeah, actually, we're
Yeah.
coming up on the 22nd, which is November 22nd, which is the anniversary of the John F. Kennedy's death. So it just strikes me that a lot of these conspiracy theories are like coming around
Oh,
the corner,
gosh.
and we're about to hear all about all these other things. And I just can't make heads or tails. I read a book called what was it called? Unspeakable, about the JFK assassination. I
Oh,
cannot
okay.
stop talking about it. It just is. It is wild. The number of things that are coming up in that book, and so the whole Charlie Kirk thing is just like reanimated my want to reread that book, just because the CIA does some crazy things, man. And these three-letter intelligence agencies, these Mossad and all these other countries. I mean, they're good at what they do. You may not like them. I don't like them.
Right.
You cannot doubt that these people are very skilled and very good at what they do. So, um, you know, forgiveness. I don't know, man. You got to figure out who to forgive first, maybe.
In
Yeah.
the mental health field, we use the language more of like rupture and repair. I don't know. I don't like the word forgiveness because of the way that religion has kind of co-opted this word and they feel like they own this word. And
Yeah.
also
Sure.
me myself, I have some trauma attached to that word specifically. I remember as a kid, I was in like, middle school, church group, whatever. And there was an incident between me and my parents, and my parents hurt my feelings really, really badly. And I remember just being like so angry at them, and then like going to youth group or whatever, and just like I wasn't myself, and they were asking me what was the matter. I kind of gave them a little bit of a rundown of what was going on, and then I found myself with all the church leadership in a room with my parents, and like they're just telling me like you need to forgive them. And I'm like, I didn't have the language at the time
Yeah.
to look at it the way that I do now. But if I could take my brain now and put it in myself back then, I would have asked like, well, what have they done to repair this? What have they done to repair their relationship with me? Like, are they asking for forgiveness? And just like the onus is on me automatically to just forgive. And then they were like, oh, and if you forgive, you can't continue to bring it up. And I'm like, well, like, I just freaking forgot it. Like, like none of this makes any goddamn sense to me. Like none of it. And it didn't feel right either. So, I mean, I guess the question that I like to ask is like, are you doing the work to repair the rupture that you created?
The other thing that I want to keep in mind also is that some people you have to understand other people's limitations, because you may be dealing with like, okay, a parental figure who might not necessarily even have the wherewithal to that culturally they're so locked in to whatever their version of events in the past, they may never even acknowledge that what they did was wrong. Like, hey, I put food on the table, what's the big deal? I beat the shit out of you, but what's the big deal? You had a warm bed to sleep in, didn't you? And so I just think that there are sometimes that you do have to you have to find the strength within yourself, I guess, and the understanding too, to like really understand the context under which all these terrible things happen to you, because they there might have been a lot of ignorance there in terms of cultural ignorance, where that's how they grew up, and so and once you learn a little bit about their history, and I hear a lot of stories about how my own parents grew up, and how some of the things that we were exposed to, they were exposed to probably 2 or 3 times worse, and so they had a really, really rough upbringing. So to kind of look at some of that and say, okay, well, I get it. You came to me with none of these tools that would have made what you did better. I have these tools, and so and if you have the ability to use those tools to repair that relationship, then I think it's worth it if you're in a position to not be further harmed by that person. But obviously, if that person's still harming you, then let's
I think of like, something that I've heard therapists often say is that no one gets over anything, but they work through things, and the person who has been wronged unjustly, in order for them to be able to get on with life, they learn the necessary tools to work through the trauma that they have that they have inherited from said persons or entities. But I have to go back to this whole thing about repair, because I agree in that when you're questioning if I should forgive a person who did wrong to me, or if I should forgive an institution who has, oppressed me for centuries. I'm talking to you, American government. Should I forgive you? And the question still remains, is what type of repair is the accused party enacting against the one who actually inherited the trauma? And I think that it's wrong for us to make people forgive those who have persecuted them unjustly. I know that when Peter asked Jesus, how many times should you forgive? 7 times. And Jesus said, no, it's 70 times 7, So he, just like this astronomical number. I think he said 70 times 70. Basically saying that, like, forgiveness should be basically a way of life. But but at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, like, how should I constantly just give a pass? Because in some cases, like, I understand that, some people look at forgiveness as a way of letting go, right? Saying that I'm not going to hold this entity, these units, this institution, this person responsible anymore for what they've done to me, so that I can move on. And if you look at forgiveness like that, more power to you. But I don't necessarily see it that way, because especially if the person or the thing is still in your life and they're constantly doing the harm, I'm like, how many times are you gonna forgive this person? You know what I'm saying? Now, if anything, I'm more so like, listen, I would recognize that you've done me harm. I will not necessarily forgive you for that, because especially if you're not enacting any type of apology or repair for what you've done to me specifically. But what I will not do is continuously, allow it to live in my mind, because that's not going to be a way for me to move on as an individual, right? I'm not going to be able to, basically go on so that I can, thrive in life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to forgive you for what you did. No, I remember what you did. I know that you did it, and God damn it, I'm holding you accountable to it. Now, whether if you're gonna take accountability for that bad boy or not, that's on you. But trust and believe, I'm not about to sit up here and trip myself up in order for me to say, "Oh, I forgive you for what you've done to me." Oh my God, no, fuck that. Can we say?
I think I'm more apt to flip it around. Like I'd be more apt to forget and not forgive, in a sense, like, and forget meaning that I'm just gonna, like you say, kind of put it to the side. That happened. I'm moving on. I'm never gonna think about that person. I'm not gonna forgive them because they did something in this saying they want to making up my mind, but they did something intentional that was mean or was hurtful or whatever the case may be. I'm gonna drop that person out of my life because I don't want to deal with that person anymore. I'm not forgiving them. I'm just going to move on. You know what I mean? It's more the not forgive, but try to forget, and eventually they just, like with the passage of time, things just fall in the background. But you're right. If I had to keep seeing the person every week, like, no, that's not going to work very well. Hey, thanks for tuning in to today's show. I really hope you enjoyed it. Do me a favor and like and subscribe to the show and tell a friend. That helps us grow and it lets us keep bringing you more voices from the other side of belief. Until we talk again, be kind to one another and remember that reason and compassion go a long way.